Did you have a good week this past week? Overall, though, how would you decide if you did? What is your criteria of evaluation? What makes a good week? Things having gone well as opposed to having gone poorly? Events turning out in your favor? Achieving goals that you've set for yourself? How about simply having the week not be as lousy as the week before it? I remember once seeing a Peanuts cartoon in which Charlie Brown is talking to Lucy, and he says to her, "I've discovered the whole secret to life. The trick is to learn to dread just one day at a time." You ever feel that way? What makes a good week? And in the 7 days ahead of us, how do we go about having a great week, the best week ever? Well, consider the following. A noted preacher writes, "Contrary to popular belief, true lasting joy, a great life, is not the result of good fortune, success, or even great accomplishment. It is the result of just one thing: substance. That awareness, regardless of how events transpire, that you are part of something that matters." True joy, the very best life possible, found only through being part of something that matters, living a life of substance. How might we better go about living just such a life? This is something of what I'd like to talk about this morning. Today we pick up the story of Moses right where we left off last week. Moses, having been essentially hiding out in the land of Midian for decades, is suddenly visited by God in the form of a burning bush. Moses discovers that despite evidence to the contrary, God is very much alive and active and present in the world and in his own personal life. And in this personal encounter, that God has a particular challenge for him. God calls Moses to return to Egypt and to lead the people of Israel out of slavery. Needless to say, this is an overwhelming task, a tremendous responsibility that is being asked of Moses. And over the next couple of chapters, we will see Moses struggle with the whole idea. He's going to try to get out of it, try to avoid it, His struggle beginning in our text today with a key question that Moses asked of God in response to this huge command and call, namely, who am I? That is, who am I, Lord, that I could even contemplate doing such a thing, let alone actually accomplish it, really? Go back and confront the mighty Egyptian empire, right this tremendous wrong, free all the slaves, lead all these people to a new land, effectively change the world, Moses' call, the whole Exodus itself, begins with this question. And it does so, I believe, because it is a key question that every person asks at some point in their life, in some way. Think about it. Like Moses, have you ever looked around at the world, either at the lives that are right near yours, or maybe to the big issues far across the globe, and you've seen the wrong, and you've been really upset about the injustice and hardship and brokenness, and you wanted to do something, you felt moved to act, but then you thought, who am I? Who am I to fix this? Right? You ever thought that? It's a key human question that every person asks at some point as they seek to become truly alive within the world in which they exist. It is the question of substance, living a life that matters somehow, God's answer? Well, unfortunately, it's kind of a letdown. Sort of a non-answer answer. In response to Moses' impassioned inquiry, God replies simply, "I'll be with you." Okay, great, As we noted last week, the central element of a strong life of faith, that awareness of God's abiding presence with us wherever we go. Okay, that's wonderful. But I'm sorry, Lord, how does that exactly answer the question at hand, the question I just asked? What does that have to do with who am I to change the world? It doesn't seem to answer the question. Or does it? In response to this crucial question of human life, a question every human being wrestles with at some point as they seek to move from just existing into truly becoming alive within their world, we get an odd, non-answer answer. What is God getting at in this? What is God perhaps saying by not saying to Moses and to us? Who's God calling right now? I don't know. In God's non-answer, I'll come back to things. In God's non-answer, what is God saying to Moses and to us, particularly in the context of God calling Moses to a life of profound significance, to a life that really matters? What does God's non-answer have to say to him and to all of us? A couple of thoughts. First, in this non-answer, God is saying to Moses, you know this isn't living. As we begin, it's important to note that in order to understand our text today, in fact, to understand any passage of Scripture, one of the first things you always have to do is to look at the context of the passage, to get its setting, particularly what has led up to it. Now, thinking about the context of our reading today, why is God visiting Moses in the land of Midian? Well, beyond the fact, as we had noted, that God has observed the suffering of the Israelites and is calling Moses to go back and lead them to freedom, the reason why this encounter is specifically taking place within Midian is because Moses has run away there, right? That is, Midian is not his homeland, it's a hiding place, as we've noted previously. Moses, though a Hebrew, was raised an Egyptian in Pharaoh's own home, a leader in Egyptian society. But despite all these personal benefits, having witnessed an injustice against his people, a Hebrew slave being beaten, Moses has acted to right the wrong. Unfortunately, his course of correction of this wrong has been even more wrong, right? It was an act of unbridled murder, plain and simple, that has changed nothing about the world and corrected no injustice anywhere, right? And thus, in fear and failure, he has run off to Midian, there to try to leave that life behind. In other words, this is the context of our text today. Moses has seen the wrongs of this world, and he has felt moved to do something about them. He knows deep within that life is more than just existence, more than just living for himself. He has felt that. But his action thus far in this regard, having been all wrong, he's run away from the whole thing. Sought to distance himself as much as he can from such a life of significance. Just disappear, forget, ignore, avoid. He's alive, but he's not really living. And this is where God meets him. In this non-answer, God, first of all, essentially is saying to him, Moses, I'm not even going to answer your question, not even going to dignify it with an answer, because you already know the answer in your heart. Who are you? Who are you to try to change the world? Well, you're that guy who felt moved to do exactly that. And for a moment in your life mattered, but you did it wrong, and now you're running away from the whole thing. Now you're just killing time on a hilltop in Midian, but you know this isn't living, and you know what you need to do. You need to go back. Will you? God's non-answer to Moses is first of all a reminder to him and to the reader, to all of us, that to begin with, we already know the answer to the question. We've known how powerful it is to actually do something that matters in the world, that actually changes somebody's life, to right an injustice. We know that. We've felt it at times when we've done that kind of thing in our lives. But so often, for one reason or another, we lose sight of this. We run away from it in fear or laziness or self-interest. And with this goes our whole life. God's non-answer is first God saying to all of us, you know the way you are right now isn't working. This isn't living, Take up the call of a life of significance, because this alone is where life is truly found. Quit spending your time mired in your problems. Quit talking about what you can't do and start thinking about what you can. Refuse to have your life mean nothing. Insist on the opposite. God's answer to Moses and to us is first a challenge to us whenever our lives seem to be going nowhere, saying, get up and do something that matters, please. You know this is what you need to do. Thinking about this scene and the call to live lives of significance, particularly this first issue that we know within us, this is how we're supposed to live, but we often lose sight of it. I couldn't help but think about what we as a church are about this week. Well, we just recognized that this week we're once again sponsoring Work Camp. And what is Work Camp? Well, at its core, it's a bunch of young people who take a week out of their lives to go and to help somebody else, to go change someone else's life, to tangibly transform the world for the better. Now understand, these kids could just as well stay at home in their air-conditioned houses, playing video games, texting their friends, whatever, But instead they come here to sleep on cots on the floor and to sweat in the hot summer sun. In fact, they even pay for the privilege to do so. Right? Why? Because something in them wants something more out of life, right? They have felt the tug upon their hearts, the call to live a life of significance. So despite all the obstacles, despite all the things that say, go do otherwise, they do this. And what happens? God meets them with life abundant. Lives changed, tangibly changed. Memories and experiences they then carry with them for the rest of their lives. Right? They are like a living example of our first point here, that a life of mere existence isn't living. God didn't create us just for that, just to kill time. And we've all felt this in our hearts. We've experienced it in those moments when we've done something that matters. It's a tug on our heart from God. But for one reason or another, we drift from this and we lose sight of it. God's non-answer to Moses is, first of all, a call to him and to all of us to simply to return to what we already know, to commit ourselves wholeheartedly to a life of significance. And, reflecting even more on the witness of work camp, think of it like this. Last work camp 2 years ago, Charlie, he was doing his regular world-renowned can drive, right? Collecting canned goods for those in need and collecting donations for the purchase of more cans. And as a quick commercial, remember, it's not too late to donate, right? Yeah, okay. Well, at the last work camp, 2 of the young people donated to Charlie's drive. And one donated $3.08, and the other donated $3.60. Now, some may say, well, that's not a big deal. That's not that much money. But you have to realize what this represented. For each of these young people, it was all that they had. And you want to know why they donated it? Because, as they told Charlie, quote, "We want to go home broke." We want to go home broke. Do you get that? They didn't want to go home with anything in their own pockets. They wanted to have everything they have to go to somebody else in need, to change somebody else's life. They were all in for a life of significance. It's a great rule in general. When you look forward to your heavenly home that awaits you in Jesus Christ, if you want to have a rich life here, then just say to God always, "Lord, I want to go home broke," right? I want to put everything I've got into changing the world. God's non-answer to Moses is, first of all, a reminder to us all when we drift into mere existence. You know this isn't living. Do what you know. Building then upon this, in this non-answer, God is secondly saying to Moses, you have more to offer than you realize. Do you remember the old story that's told of the church committee that gathered one evening for a very long meeting? Sounds familiar. Well, at this church, their current pastor was retiring. And so the search committee for a new pastor had gathered to go over resumes in hopes of finding the perfect new minister. Unfortunately, despite hours of reading resumes and discussing and debating, no luck so far. Tired of the whole process, they were just about ready to call it a night when they came upon this final letter of introduction from a candidate, and it read, "To the pulpit nominating committee, it is my understanding that you are in the process of searching for a new pastor, and I would like to apply for the position. I wish I could say that I am a terrific preacher, but I can't. Actually, I stutter very badly when I speak. I wish I could say that I have an impressive educational background, but I can't. No seminary, just the school of hard knocks. I wish I could say that I bring a wealth of experience to the job, but I can't. I have never been a pastor before, unless you count the flock of sheep that I am currently shepherding. I wish I could say I have wonderful pastoral skills, but I can't. Sometimes I lose my temper, and I have been known to get violent when upset. Once I even killed somebody. But gracious folks that you are, I'm certain that you will not hold this against me. I know churches these days especially want young ministers to attract young members, and I wish I could say that I am young, but I can't. Actually, I am 80 years old. With all that, which might go against me, why am I applying for your position? Simple. One afternoon recently, the voice of God spoke to me and said I had been chosen to lead. I admit I was a bit reluctant at first, but here I am. I am looking forward to hearing from you and to leading you into an exciting new future." The pulpit committee members looked at one another. The chairperson asked, "Well, what do you think?" The rest of the committee was aghast. A stuttering, uneducated, inexperienced, old, obviously neurotic ex-murderer as their new pastor? You got to be kidding. The chairperson eyed them all around before she added, "The letter is signed, yours sincerely, Moses." Right? Yeah. In many respects, it's an incredibly odd, unlikely, unqualified choice to lead the people of Israel. And no one, it seems, sees this lack of qualification more clearly than Moses himself. "Who am I?" he asks. Of course, what is he missing that God sees? Well, what he's missing is what he has going for him that no one else has. Key qualities for the task ahead, namely, he is the only Israelite in the world who has been raised an Egyptian, right? He knows Egyptian culture. He knows the players. He knows the language. He knows the politics. He knows their religion, right? He's the only guy for the job. He has all this stuff going for him, but he can't see this. And this, I believe, is the second issue God is getting at for him and for all of us. In his non-answer, God is effectively demonstrating how often we all lose sight of all that we have to offer, choosing to see instead all that we lack. And that as we, the reader, can see the absurdity of Moses' own sense of inadequacy, we need to learn to look at ourselves in the same way. To stop seeing inadequacy and instead see giftedness. To see that each of us has unique qualities and experiences that we alone bring to the world, and what God calls us to do is to act on these things, for their life will be found. To quit focusing on what we lack and instead focus on what is ours and then offer that to the world. One author writes, true story. In 1658, a young Italian boy named Antonio was apprenticed to the great violin maker Nicholas Amati. Legend has it that like his townfolk, Antonio loved music. Cremona was a town in which musical ability was highly valued, but poor Antonio was not a musician. When he tried singing, his friends nicknamed him Squeaky Voice. When he tried to learn the violin, he was all thumbs. He felt so useless. About the only thing Antonio could do was to whittle on a block of wood with his knife. One day, Antonio sat whittling by the roadside as three of his very musical friends were filling the air with their beautiful playing and their singing, and people would stop and listen. One gentleman stopped longer than any of the others and asked the friends to sing their song again. After they finished, he dropped a gold coin into the hand of the singer. Then he moved on down the street. A gold coin was a princely sum for a street singer. Who is he? Asked Antonio. Well, that's Amati, his friends proudly replied. That's Niccolo Amati, the greatest violin maker in all of Italy. That planted a thought in Antonio's mind. The next morning, he went to Amati's house and waited for the great master to come out. And when Amati opened the door, Antonio jumped up and told him that he wanted to become a violin maker. I can't sing and I can't play, but I can carve. Would Amati take him on as an apprentice? Amati agreed, and the 11-year-old went to work for him. And many years later, Niccolo died, and Antonio took over the business. And Antonio's full name? It's Antonio Stradivari. The greatest violin maker of all time. Antonio couldn't sing, he couldn't play, but he could whittle, right? That was his gift, and what a tremendous gift, and he just offered it to the world. Will we do the same? God's non-answer to Moses is secondly a reminder to him and to us. You have more to offer than you realize. Just offer it. Which leads us then into finally, third, in his non-answer, God is saying to Moses, you are not alone. In the end, of course, in God's avoidance of a direct answer to Moses' question, God does make a significant statement, namely, I will be with you. Or to put it another way, Moses, try to remember that it's not all about you, okay? We're in this together. And this is the final crucial point to remember here. In seeking to live lives of significance, to answer the call upon our hearts, to join the work of transforming the world of God, to remember that we are not in this alone. That as we noted last week, God is with us always. And the point is, it seems, God is essentially saying, please just do your part, the part I'm asking of you today, and I'll do all the rest, okay? This is a team effort. Final lesson to Moses and to each of us, you are not alone. If you will just do that thing that moves you, be obedient to the call upon your heart to better the world, God will meet you there with things with a far greater effect than you can imagine. In closing, consider the following true story. A number of years ago, deputy principal and football coach David Smith of the Whitwell Middle School in Whitwell, Tennessee, he attended a teacher training course in nearby Chattanooga, and he became very moved by the experience, and he wanted to do something more than just teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. He actually wanted to make a difference in the world. Out of the blue, he proposed an after-school course on the Holocaust that it be offered at the school, and this was in a school with hardly any ethnic and absolutely no Jewish students. English and social sciences teacher Sandra Roberts was selected to teach, and in October of that year, she held the first session. She began by reading aloud from Anne Frank's Diary of a Young Girl and Elie Wiesel's Night. And she read aloud because most of the students there in their school couldn't afford to buy books. What gripped the eighth graders most as the course progressed was the sheer number of Jews who were put to death by the Third Reich. It was 6 million. They could hardly fathom such an immense figure. One day, Roberts was explaining to the class that some compassionate people in 1940s Europe stood up for the Jews. After the Nazis invaded Norway, many courageous Norwegians expressed solidarity with their Jewish fellow citizens by pinning ordinary paper clips to their lapels, as Jews were forced to wear the Star of David on theirs. And someone then had the idea to collect 6 million paper clips to represent the 6 million Holocaust victims. And the idea caught on, and the students began bringing in paper clips from home, from aunts and uncles and friends, and so forth. They set up a web page. A few weeks later, the first letter arrived, and then others. Many contained paper clips. By the end of the school year, the group had assembled 100,000 clips. But it occurred to the students that collecting 6 million paper clips at that rate would take a lifetime. So the group's activities have now spilled over to from Robert's classroom. It's now called the Holocaust Project. You can find it online. Across the hall, students have created a concentration camp simulation with paper cutouts of themselves pasted on the wall. Chicken wire stretches across the wall to represent the electrified fences. Wire mesh is hung with shoes to represent the millions of shoes the victims left behind when they were marched away. And every year they now enact the walk to give students at least some inkling of what the people must have felt like in the Nazi guards marched them off to the camps. Meanwhile, the paper clip counting continues. Students gather for their Wednesday meeting, each wearing the group's polo shirt emblazoned, changing the world one clip at a time. All sorts of clips arrive now: silver and bronze colored clips, colored plastic coated clips, small clips, large clips, round clips, triangular clips, and even clips fashioned out of wood. The students file all the letters they receive from all around the world in ring binders. Their plan is to obtain an authentic German railroad car from the 1940s, one that may have actually transported victims, and the car will be turned into a museum that they will house all the paper clips as well as display the many letters they received from around the world. When the project is finally completed, for generations of Whitwell eighth graders, a paper clip will never again just be a paper clip. Instead, it will carry a message of perseverance, empathy, tolerance, and understanding. One student puts it like this: "Now, whenever I see someone, I think before I speak, I think before I act, and I think before I judge." All this from one person who decided not just to live, not just to go about his business, but to make a difference somewhere, to live a life of significance, one paper clip at a time. Contrary to popular belief, true lasting joy, a great life, is not the result of good fortune, success, or even accomplishment. It is a result of just one thing: significance. That awareness, regardless of how events transpire, that you are part of something that matters. This week, have a fantastic week, the best week ever, Remember, you know that merely existing isn't living. You have more to offer than you realize, and you are not alone. Let us now prepare to celebrate the sacrament of our Lord. Would you please turn to the order for Holy Communion, found on page 12 in the front of the hymnal.